The glass beneath my boots trembled a full second before the alarm even sounded, and I knew someone important had just stepped onto the promenade behind me. I did not turn around. Turning around draws attention, and attention was the one thing I had spent the last 6 years trying to avoid. I kept my eyes on the cargo manifest glowing across my wrist display, pretending the numbers mattered more than the sudden hush spreading through the crowded deck of Meridian Concord Station. Then a voice cut through the silence, smooth and confident, carrying the kind of authority that only comes from never once being told no. "You, the quiet one by the railing. I have been watching you for the last 10 minutes, and you have not looked at me once. Do you know who I am?" I lifted my head slowly, standing a few paces away, surrounded by 4 armored guards and a small cloud of hovering camera drones, was a young woman unlike anyone else on the promenade. The skin held a faint silver sheen under the station lights. Her eyes were a pale violet that seemed to catch every source of light in the room, and the fabric of her long coat shifted color as she moved, like oil on water. Every alien on that deck had gone still and lowered their heads slightly in her direction. Every alien except me. "I don't actually," I said. "Should I?" A ripple of shock passed through the crowd, quiet gasps. Someone behind me actually stepped backward as if my words might be contagious. The woman's guards tensed, hands moving toward the weapons at their hips, but she raised one hand and they froze instantly. "I am Vantessa, first daughter of House Visari, heir to the Dominion throne," she said, tilting her head, studying me the way someone studies an insect that refuses to fly away when threatened. "And you are the first person on this entire station who has not bowed." "I didn't know bowing was required," I said. "Nobody handed me a manual when I got off the transport." A few nervous laughs escaped the crowd before they were quickly swallowed. Vantessa's lips curved into a smile that was equal parts amused and dangerous. "I like that," she said. "Most people here perform for me. You are not performing. Tell me your name." "Owen," I said. "Owen Whitfield. I fix cargo lifts for a living. Nothing interesting to report." "Owen Whitfield," she repeated, rolling the syllables around in her mouth like she was tasting them. "A cargo lift technician who looks a stranger in the eye and does not flinch. That is rare, Owen Whitfield. Rare enough that I am bored, and boredom, for someone like me, is dangerous." I felt the first cold thread of worry settle into my stomach. I had heard about the Visari long before I ever set foot on this station. Their culture prized challenge above almost everything else, dueling as sport, as entertainment, as a way of proving worth in front of a crowd. Refusing a Visari challenge, especially one issued by royalty, was considered a deep insult across half the sectors they controlled. "I'm sure there are more interesting people around," I said carefully, already stepping back. "Diplomats, pilots, actual soldiers. I just fix machines." "I did not ask what you do," Vantessa said, stepping closer, the crowd parting around her like water around a blade. "I asked you a question with my eyes, and you answered it with your spine. Fight me, Owen Whitfield. Just a friendly match. The Proving Ring, on Level 9, hosts open challenges every evening. Nothing lethal, nothing permanent, only steel and skill, and a little bit of fun." The word fun landed strangely in my ears. For her, this truly was a game, a small diversion in an otherwise predictable day, surrounded by people who agreed with everything she said. For me, the word fun had not applied to a fight in a very long time. "I appreciate the offer," I said, keeping my voice level, "but I really am not the kind of person you're looking for. I promise you, this would not be entertaining." "Everyone says that," she said, waving a hand dismissively, "right up until they realize refusing me in public is far more humiliating than losing to me ever could be." She had a point, and the way the crowd had gone utterly silent told me she was not exaggerating. Somewhere behind those violet eyes, calculations were already running, weighing my refusal against the optics of her own authority. A princess challenged and turned away in front of witnesses was not something her culture forgot easily. I understood, in that instant, that this conversation had never actually been a request. "You're not really giving me a choice, are you?" I said. "I am giving you every choice," Vantessa said sweetly. "You may say yes with dignity, or you may say no and watch what happens to that dignity instead." I exhaled slowly, glancing past her at the guards, at the drones, at the sea of faces waiting to see what the strange, unimpressed human would do next. Somewhere in the crowd, an older figure in dark robes had gone very still, watching me with an intensity that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with recognition. I did not know him, but something in the way his hands trembled told me he might know something about me that I had spent 6 years trying very hard to bury. "Fine," I said at last, turning my full attention back to Vantessa. "One match, friendly, nothing lethal, nothing permanent, exactly like you said." Her smile widened into something bright and delighted, the expression of someone who had gotten exactly what she wanted and never doubted for a second that she would. "Wonderful," she said. "Level 9, 1 hour from now. Do try to make it interesting, Owen Whitfield. I have grown so terribly tired of easy victories." She turned in a swirl of shifting color and walked away, her guards falling into step around her, the crowd bowing low as she passed. Within seconds, the promenade returned to its normal noise and motion, as if nothing unusual had happened at all, as if a princess had not just cornered a stranger into a public duel on a whim. I stood there a moment longer, staring at the cargo manifest still glowing uselessly on my wrist, my pulse beating a little faster than it should have for a simple, friendly match. Because I knew something Vantessa did not. I knew that whatever she thought she was inviting onto that stage tonight, it was not going to be the quiet cargo technician standing in front of her. I turned to walk back toward the maintenance bay, and that was when I noticed the old man in dark robes was still watching me, his expression somewhere between disbelief and fear, as if he had just seen a ghost walk calmly through a crowded room wearing the face of a man he thought had disappeared forever. I did not stop to ask him what he knew. I already had a feeling I would find out soon enough, one way or another, whether I wanted to or not. The maintenance bay smelled like hot metal and recycled air, familiar and calming, the exact opposite of what I felt walking back into it. I had barely reached my workbench when a voice called out from the doorway, low and urgent. "You're the man who just agreed to fight the princess." I turned to find the old man from the promenade standing there, his dark robes marking him as some kind of archivist or scholar, his hands still trembling slightly at his sides. Up close, his eyes held a strange mixture of awe and dread, the look of someone confronting a memory they had never expected to see walking and breathing in front of them. "News travels fast," I said, setting down my tools. "News like that always does," he said, stepping further into the bay, glancing over his shoulder as if worried someone might be listening. "My name is Torvin Melkar. I catalog historical records for 3 sectors of the Dominion. I have spent the last 30 years studying the Ember War, memorizing every account, every casualty list, every battle report that survived the fighting." "That's a heavy way to spend 30 years, I said carefully, keeping my expression neutral even as something tightened in my chest. "There was one name in those records that appeared more than any other," Torvin continued, ignoring my attempt to steer the conversation elsewhere. "A call sign, not a birth name. The records never gave a birth name because nobody who fought against that call sign lived long enough to learn it, and the ones who did survive refused to speak it aloud, even decades later. They called him Ashwalker." The name landed in the small room like a physical weight, and I felt my jaw tighten involuntarily. I had not heard that word spoken aloud in 6 years, not since the day I signed the discharge papers and walked away from everything that name represented. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "I watched you stand in front of a Visari princess and refuse to lower your eyes," Torvin said quietly. "I watched hundreds of trained soldiers and seasoned diplomats bow the moment she entered a room, and you looked at her like she was simply another person asking you a question. I have only ever read about one kind of human who could do that without a flicker of fear, and every single account of him ends with him walking away from a battlefield that should have ended his life 10 times over. I said nothing, because there was nothing safe to say. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, until Torvin finally exhaled and lowered his voice even further. "I am not here to expose you," he said. "I am here because I am afraid for her. Vantessa does not know what she has just challenged. She thinks she is inviting an amusing evening of entertainment onto that stage. If even half of what the old records claim is true, she has no idea what she is about to stand in front of." "She said it was friendly," I said. "Nothing lethal, nothing permanent." "The rules of the match will not be the danger," Torvin said. "The danger is what happens to a young woman's confidence, her reputation, her entire understanding of her place in the universe. If she steps into that ring believing she cannot lose, and discovers otherwise in front of every camera drone on this station. Please, consider withdrawing. Consider losing on purpose, if you must. Anything but showing her the truth of what you are." I thought about that for a long moment, turning a wrench over in my hands without really seeing it. Part of me wanted to agree immediately, to promise I would take a quiet fall in the second round and let the whole thing fade into forgettable gossip by morning. But another part of me, a part I had tried very hard to silence for 6 years, knew that promise would not survive contact with the ring itself. Some instincts do not simply switch off because you want them to. "I'll do what I can to keep it small," I said finally, which was the most honest promise I could offer. Torvin studied my face for a moment longer, then nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly how much weight that sentence was carrying. "Then I hope, for her sake and yours, that it is enough." He left without another word, his robes trailing behind him as he disappeared back into the crowded corridor. I stood alone in the maintenance bay for a long time after that, staring at nothing in particular, feeling the old muscle memory stir awake somewhere deep beneath years of careful, deliberate quiet. An hour later, the corridors leading to Level 9 were packed tighter than I had ever seen them, alien species of every shape and color pressing toward the entrance of the proving ring, drawn by word of a princess's public challenge spreading faster than any official announcement could have managed. I moved through the crowd with my hood pulled low, trying to reach the competitor's entrance without drawing more attention than I already had. Inside the preparation chamber, a young Vasari woman in polished armor was waiting for me, her expression sharp and businesslike, nothing like the crowd's excited energy outside. "You must be Owen Whitfield," she said. "I am Kessa Vorn, senior aide to Princess Vantessa. I need you to understand something before this match begins." "I'm listening," I said. "Withdraw," Kessa said bluntly. "Now, quietly, before the doors open, I will handle the excuse. Illness, an emergency repair, anything believable. The princess enjoys her games, but she has never once, in 3 years serving her, chosen an opponent this unpredictable. Something about you unsettles her advisors, myself included, and I would rather lose a small amount of face managing an excuse than risk whatever instinct is telling half this station's senior staff to be afraid." "You want me to walk away?" I said. "I want this evening to end without complications," Kessa said. "Complications tend to follow certain kinds of people, Mr. Whitfield, and I have read enough unclassified records to have a guess about which kind you might be." I almost laughed at how quickly word had spread, how many people had apparently pieced together fragments of a story I had spent 6 years trying to bury under grease stains and cargo manifests. But laughing would not have helped anything, so instead I simply shook my head. "I already tried walking away once today," I said. "The princess made it very clear that was not an available option. I'm not interested in humiliating anyone in there tonight, and I meant that when I said it earlier. But I gave my word, and I intend to keep it, even if I keep it carefully." Kessa studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally stepping aside. "Then I hope carefully is a word you understand better than most, because Vantessa does not know how to lose gracefully. She has never had to learn." She led me through a final corridor toward the arena entrance, the noise of the crowd growing louder with every step, a wall of sound made from thousands of excited voices anticipating an easy, entertaining victory for their princess. I paused at the threshold, taking one last steady breath, feeling the familiar cold clarity settle over my thoughts, the way it always had, years ago, before every battle that name Ashwalker had ever been attached to. Somewhere beyond those doors, Vantessa was waiting, confident and smiling, completely unaware that the quiet cargo technician she had cornered for a bit of fun carried a weight behind his calm eyes that entire empires had once learned to fear. I stepped forward into the light, hoping, more than anything, that Torvin's warning would prove unnecessary, and knowing, deep down, that it probably would not. The proving ring was larger than I expected, a circular arena carved into the heart of Level 9, its walls lined with tiered seating that rose up into darkness, thousands of eyes reflecting the pale blue glow of the containment field overhead. The floor beneath my boots hummed with quiet energy, the kind of hum that meant the safety systems were active and ready to absorb any strike that crossed a dangerous threshold. Nothing lethal, nothing permanent, exactly as promised, though the crowd noise suggested nobody expected the promise to matter much either way. Vantessa was already waiting at the center of the ring when I stepped through the archway, dressed now in a fitted combat suit that shimmered faintly with the same shifting colors as her coat had earlier. A long dueling blade, resting easily in one hand, its edge humming with a soft violet charge. She looked completely at home standing there, relaxed and confident, the posture of someone who had done this 100 times before and lost exactly 0 of them. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I half expected Kessa to talk you out of it. She has a talent for convincing people to disappear quietly." "She tried," I admitted, stepping into the ring, feeling the containment field tighten faintly around the perimeter, sealing us both inside a bubble of humming light. "I told her I keep my promises." "An honest opponent," Vantessa said, twirling the blade once in her fingers. "How refreshing. Most people I face have already decided they are going to lose before the match even begins. It makes for very boring viewing." A referee, a stern-faced official in silver armor, stepped between us and raised a hand for silence. The crowd noise dropped instantly, thousands of voices fading into a tense, expectant hush that pressed against my ears like a physical weight. "This is a First Blood exhibition match," the referee announced, his voice carrying easily through the amplified arena. "Weapons are set to non-lethal charge. The match ends upon 3 registered strikes, submission, or referee intervention. Combatants, prepare yourselves." A weapon rack rose from the floor beside me, offering a selection of blades and staves similar to Vantessa's own. I studied them for a moment, then reached past the ornate options toward a plain, balanced short blade near the back, simple and unremarkable, exactly the kind of weapon nobody would expect a legend to choose. "Interesting selection," Vantessa said, raising an eyebrow. "Most opponents reach for the largest blade available, hoping size compensates for skill." "I never liked carrying more than I needed," I said, testing the weapon's balance in my hand, feeling old instincts settle into my fingers like they had never left. The referee raised his hand once more, held it there for a long, breathless second, then dropped it sharply. "Begin." Vantessa moved first, fast and fluid, closing the distance between us in a heartbeat, her blade sweeping in a precise arc aimed at my shoulder. I stepped aside, letting the strike pass a hand's width from my chest, and did not counter. The crowd gasped at the near miss, unsure whether to read it as skill or luck. She pressed forward immediately, chaining strikes together with impressive speed, testing my footwork, my reactions, searching for an opening with the confident aggression of someone who had never once needed a second plan. I gave ground steadily, deflecting where necessary, dodging where I could, letting her set the pace, letting her enjoy the opening exchanges exactly the way I had promised myself I would. "You are quick," she said between strikes, sounding delighted rather than frustrated. "Most opponents are already tired by now." "I haven't started trying yet," I said, and immediately regretted how much truth slipped into those words. Her eyes narrowed slightly, curiosity sharpening into something more focused. She adjusted her stance, shifting from playful aggression into a tighter, more disciplined rhythm, the kind of transition that told me her earlier strikes had only been an opening act. The next flurry came faster, sharper, driving me back toward the edge of the containment field, and for the first time I felt genuine pressure behind her attacks. I let one strike land, a controlled graze against my forearm, that the arena's sensors registered with a soft chime. The crowd erupted into cheering, the first point of the match landing clean in the princess's favor. "One," the referee called out. Vantessa stepped back, grinning, clearly enjoying the sound of the crowd celebrating her success. "Careful, Owen Whitfield. 2 more and this friendly match becomes a very short story." "Noted," I said, rolling my shoulder, feeling the mild sting fade quickly beneath the arena's safety-dampening field. We circled each other for a moment, the crowd noise settling back into anticipation. I could see the calculation behind her violet eyes, already planning her next sequence, already confident this would end exactly the way every previous match of hers had ended. I let her believe that a little longer, watching her footwork, her weight distribution, the subtle tell in her shoulders before every real strike versus every feint. Old patterns, older instincts, quietly cataloging everything without conscious effort, the way breathing required no conscious effort either. She came at me again, faster this time, weaving a combination designed to overwhelm rather than test, 3 strikes flowing into a fourth, meant to catch whatever opening the first 3 created. I blocked the first, slipped the second, and on the third, instead of retreating, I stepped forward, inside her reach, close enough that her blade's momentum carried harmlessly past my shoulder. The crowd's gasp was audible even through the containment field's hum. I did not strike back immediately. Instead, I simply held the position, close enough to see genuine surprise flicker across her expression, close enough to feel her breathing catch for half a second before she recovered and pushed off, resetting the distance between us with practiced discipline. "Nobody gets that close," she said, and for the first time, a thread of something other than amusement colored her voice. "Nobody who isn't trying to end the match immediately." "I told you," I said quietly, "I haven't started trying yet." The second exchange began differently. Vantessa's earlier playfulness had cooled into something more focused, more serious, the posture of a competitor rather than a bored princess entertaining herself with an amusing stranger. She struck faster, harder, driving a sequence of strikes designed to test every angle I had shown her in the first exchange, searching for the limits of whatever unusual skill had let me step inside her guard. I matched her, step for step, letting instinct guide movements I had spent 6 years pretending to forget. Every block landed exactly where it needed to. Every retreat carried me exactly as far as necessary, and not a fraction further. The crowd's cheering had shifted somewhere along the way, no longer simply celebrating their princess's dominance, but reacting instead to the growing realization that something unusual was unfolding in front of them, something that did not match the easy victory they had all gathered to watch. A murmur rippled through the upper tiers, voices rising and falling in confused, uncertain waves. I caught fragments of it between exchanges. Questions passed rapidly from seat to seat, nobody quite able to explain what they were watching, but everybody sensing it mattered. Vantessa noticed too. I saw it in the slight tightening around her eyes, the barely perceptible shift in her breathing, the recognition that her opponent was not simply lucky or unusually athletic for his species. She pressed harder, driving the pace faster than before, chaining longer sequences together, testing reach and timing and reflexes with increasing urgency, as if speed alone might uncover whatever she was beginning to suspect she was facing. I let her land a second strike, a shallow touch against my ribs that the sensors registered with another soft chime, deliberately choosing the opening rather than simply failing to close it in time. The crowd cheered again, though with noticeably less enthusiasm than before, as if some instinct in the collective audience already sensed the gesture had not been an accident. "2," the referee called. "One more," Vantessa said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier lightness, replaced by something more careful, more calculating. One more, and this is over. Then let's see it, I said. She came at me with everything then, abandoning the disciplined patience of her earlier strikes for something faster and more desperate, a flurry meant to finally close out the match before whatever growing uncertainty in the crowd could take further root. I matched her speed for the first time since the match began, no longer holding anything back in reserve, letting 6 years of careful restraint fall away one motion at a time. Her blade came in high. I turned my shoulder, letting it pass a finger's width from my collar, my own blade rising to meet her wrist in a controlled, precise motion that stopped a hair's breadth from actual contact, close enough that the sensors registered a hit anyway, close enough that everyone in that arena understood exactly how much closer it could have been if I had chosen to let it land for real. The chime sounded, but this time it was not her point. One, the referee called, his voice noticeably quieter than before. Match tied, 1-2. Silence spread through the arena like water soaking into dry ground, thousands of voices falling quiet all at once, the earlier excited chatter replaced by something heavier, something closer to disbelief. Vantessa stood frozen for a moment, staring at me across the space between us, her chest rising and falling with exertion, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and dawning, unwelcome understanding. "Who are you?" she said quietly, the question no longer playful, no longer the idle curiosity of a bored princess looking for entertainment. It carried real weight now, the sound of someone beginning to realize they had wandered into something far larger than they had planned for. I did not answer immediately. Somewhere in the crowd, I caught sight of Torvin standing near the front row, his face pale, his hands gripping the railing in front of him like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Behind him, Kessa Vorn had gone completely still, her earlier businesslike composure replaced by something close to alarm. "Someone who really did just want to fix cargo lifts today," I said finally, and lifted my blade back into a ready stance. "Your point, Princess. Let's finish this properly." The final exchange did not begin the way the others had. Vantessa did not rush forward with the same confident aggression that had defined every previous strike. Instead, she circled slowly, studying me with new eyes, recalculating everything she thought she understood about the man standing across from her. "You moved like a soldier," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the front rows to hear. "Not a duelist, a soldier. There is a difference, and I have trained with enough of both to know it. Does it matter which one I am?" I asked, "if the match is still the same either way?" "It matters a great deal," she said, "because soldiers do not play games. They finish things." She struck without warning, faster than before, a single precise thrust, aimed not to score a point, but to test whether I would finally reveal the ceiling of my ability. I let the old instincts answer for me, sidestepping the thrust and redirecting her blade with a small, controlled motion that spun her half a step off balance. It would have been the easiest opening of the entire match to exploit. I did not take it. She recovered instantly, breathing hard, staring at me with an expression that had finally shed every trace of amusement. "You could have ended that," she said. "Why didn't you?" "Because ending it wouldn't prove anything you don't already suspect," I said quietly. "You already know how this goes, if I stop holding back. I think some part of you has known for the last 2 exchanges." A ripple moved through the crowd, whispers passing rapidly from row to row, and this time I caught the word clearly, spoken by more than one voice at once, spreading outward like fire catching dry grass. "Ashwalker." I saw the exact moment it reached Vantessa, saw her spine straighten, saw the blade lower slightly in her grip as the name settled into place behind her eyes, matching against records she must have studied as a child, cautionary tales told to young royals about the war fought a generation ago, about the human commander whose name alone had once been enough to end battles before the first shot was fired. "That's not possible," she said, though the certainty in her voice had cracked wide open. "Ashwalker died at the Korvath line. Every record says so. Every account. Every eyewitness. Every account was written by people who needed the war to end with a clean story. I said. Sometimes the truth is quieter than the legend. I walked away from that battlefield. I just never told anyone where I walked to. The referee had gone completely still, his hand hovering uncertainly over the controls that would end the match, clearly uncertain whether protocol had ever anticipated a moment like this one. The crowd noise had shifted from confused murmuring into something closer to a held breath, thousands of beings across dozens of species suddenly aware they were witnessing something none of them would ever be able to properly explain to anyone who had not seen it themselves. Vantessa lowered her blade another inch, her earlier confidence replaced by something rawer, more honest. My grandmother fought in that war, she said quietly, no longer performing for the crowd, no longer speaking as a princess, but simply as someone standing across from a story she had grown up fearing. She told me once that the scariest thing about Ashwalker was not his strength, it was that he never wanted to fight at all, that every account of him ended the same way, with him letting someone walk away instead of finishing what he easily could have. Your grandmother sounds like she paid more attention than most historians, I said. Why didn't you tell me? Vantessa asked, and for the first time since the promenade, her voice held no trace of command in it at all, only a simple, exhausted question. On the deck, earlier, you could have said something, anything. You let me challenge you knowing exactly what would happen. I tried to warn you, I said gently. More than once, if you remember. You didn't want a warning, you wanted a game. She flinched slightly at that, the truth landing harder than any strike either of us had thrown in the ring. Around us, the silence had grown so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the containment field clearly, for the first time since the match began. A steady, patient sound beneath the weight of everything unsaid between us. I don't want to finish this match, she said finally, lowering her blade the rest of the way, letting it hang loosely at her side. Not like this, not against you. I understood immediately what that admission cost her. Standing in front of thousands of witnesses, cameras still recording every second, her own guards and advisors, watching a princess who had built her public identity around never once losing gracefully. I stepped forward slowly, deliberately closing the distance between us, until we stood close enough to speak without the amplified arena carrying every word to the crowd. You don't have to finish it the way you're thinking, I said quietly, keeping my voice low enough that only she could hear it clearly. There's still one point left. Let's give the crowd an ending they can actually understand, instead of a mystery neither of us has to explain tonight. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for whatever hidden meaning might be behind the offer, and slowly, something like understanding settled over her expression. You're offering me a way to lose without losing everything, she said quietly. I'm offering you a way to end this, like a competitor, instead of a legend's footnote, I said. The difference matters more than people usually think it does. She nodded slowly, straightening her posture, some of the old composure returning to her shoulders, though tempered now by something new, something that looked almost like respect rather than confidence. She raised her blade back into a ready stance, and I mirrored the motion, giving the watching crowd exactly the image they needed to see. Two competitors squared off for a final, decisive exchange. Make it look difficult, she murmured, barely moving her lips. I would rather lose to someone who made me work for every second of it than admit I never had a chance at all. You made me work for 2 of those 3 points, I said honestly. That part was never pretend. She struck first, a clean, disciplined thrust that I parried with deliberate effort, letting my counter carry the visible strain of genuine competition rather than the effortless certainty I had held back the entire match. We traded 3 more exchanges, each one closer than it needed to be, each one giving the crowd the show they had gathered to watch, until finally I let her final combination push me back half a step, opening just enough space for my own counter to land, controlled and precise, against the flat of her shoulder. The chime rang out clearly across the silent arena. 2, the referee called, his voice unsteady. Match point, 3-2, Owen Whitfield. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the crowd erupted, not into the celebratory cheering that had greeted the earlier points, but into something louder and stranger, a collective roar of disbelief and awe that shook the tiered seating from top to bottom. Vantessa lowered her blade completely, breathing hard, sweat beading along her hairline, and looked at me with an expression that held no trace of the bored, confident princess who had cornered me on the promenade only hours earlier. "Thank you," she said quietly, beneath the roar of the crowd, "for making that easier than it should have been." "You earned every point that scoreboard says you didn't get," I said. "That's not something I could fake, even if I wanted to." She managed a tired, genuine smile at that, the first honest expression I had seen from her since the match began, and reached out to grip my forearm in what I recognized, from 6 years of careful study on cultures very different from my own, as the Vasari gesture of respect between equals rather than victor and defeated. "I think," she said, loud enough now for the front rows to hear clearly, "that this station just witnessed something far more interesting than the easy victory everyone expected tonight." "That tends to happen," I said quietly, "whenever people stop asking who someone is and start paying attention to who they actually are." The referee finally found his voice, raising both hands to formally end the match, though his announcement was almost entirely lost beneath the continuing roar of the crowd, thousands of voices carrying the name Ashwalker outward through the station's corridors, faster than any official broadcast could ever have managed on its own. The preparation chamber felt smaller after the match than it had before it, crowded now with guards, aides, and a handful of station officials all trying to process what they had just witnessed. I sat quietly on a bench near the wall, letting the noise wash over me, waiting for the adrenaline in my chest to finally settle into something calmer. Kessa Vorn found me first, pushing through the crowd with the same businesslike focus she had shown before the match, though her expression now carried something closer to reluctant admiration than suspicion. "You held back the entire time," she said, not quite a question. "Every point she scored, every moment she thought she had an advantage, you let her have it." "I let her have what she earned," I corrected gently. "There's a difference. She's genuinely skilled, Kessa, better than most opponents I've faced in a long time. I didn't need to manufacture that story for her. I just needed to stop hiding how much effort it actually took." Kessa studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. "The Dominion will want a full report on this," she said. "Officially confirming a war legend has been quietly living among cargo technicians for 6 years is not the kind of thing that stays contained to one station." "I figured as much," I said. "I stopped expecting quiet a few hours ago." Vantessa appeared a moment later, freshly changed out of her combat suit, her earlier confident stride now carrying a more thoughtful, measured quality. The crowd of aides and officials parted for her automatically, though she waved most of them back, wanting a private moment before whatever official ceremony her staff was undoubtedly already preparing. "I owe you an apology," she said, sitting down on the bench beside me, close enough to speak quietly without the small crowd overhearing. "I challenged you for entertainment. I never once considered that I might actually be endangering something or someone that mattered." "You weren't endangering anyone," I said. "The match was exactly what you promised. Nothing lethal, nothing permanent. You kept your word the entire time." "That's not what I mean," she said, shaking her head slightly. "I mean I treated a person's entire history as though it existed purely for my amusement. My grandmother would have been horrified to learn I picked a fight with a legend she used to warn me about, purely because I was bored on a slow afternoon." "For what it's worth," I said, "you handled discovering the truth better than most people would have. You could have panicked. You could have ordered your guards to intervene the moment things got uncomfortable. Instead, you finished the match, lost gracefully, and asked honest questions afterward. That's not nothing, Vantessa." She considered that for a moment, a small, genuine smile crossing her face. "You called me by my name instead of my title," she observed. "Nobody does that anymore, not since I was very young." "You told me not to bow to titles I don't recognize," I said. "Seemed only fair to return the courtesy." She laughed at that, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, so different from the polished performance she had carried on the promenade earlier that day. "I think," she said, "I would genuinely like to speak with you again sometime, Owen Whitfield. Not as a princess issuing a challenge, just as someone curious about the person behind a name that used to frighten an entire generation of my people." "I'd like that," I said honestly. "Assuming this doesn't end with an entire empire showing up at my maintenance bay demanding explanations." "I can arrange for it to be a smaller conversation than that," she said, smiling. "A single princess, perhaps, rather than an entire empire. I think that's a reasonable compromise." Word of the match spread through Meridian Concord Station faster than any single person could have predicted, carried by camera drones, whispered conversations, and the kind of excited retelling that only grows more dramatic with every new audience. By the following morning, station officials from 3 different sectors had sent formal inquiries requesting confirmation of my identity, each one more cautious and respectful than the last, as if simply asking the wrong question might somehow provoke the very legend they were trying to verify. I answered what I could honestly answer, declined what I preferred to keep private, and made it clear, as gently but firmly as possible, that I had no interest in returning to any kind of public role. The war had ended. Whatever debt I felt I owed to it had been paid in full the day I walked away from the Corvath line and chose, deliberately, to disappear into an ordinary life among people who had no reason to fear my name. Torvin visited the maintenance bay a few days later, looking considerably calmer than he had on the night of the match, carrying a small data tablet under one arm. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for handling that with more restraint than the old records ever suggested you were capable of. Some of the accounts I studied made you sound almost unstoppable, almost frightening. Watching you last night, I saw something different. Someone choosing carefully, every single moment, exactly how much of himself to reveal." "The records probably weren't wrong," I said. "War brings out parts of people that peace doesn't need anymore. I spent a long time learning how to put those parts away." "For what it's worth," Torvin said, "I think you succeeded. The station is already treating the entire event as something closer to legend than fact. Exactly the kind of story that grows softer and stranger with each retelling, until eventually nobody remembers the exact details at all. I suspect that suits you perfectly." "It does," I admitted. "Better than becoming a permanent headline, at least." Kessa Vorn stopped by once more before the Dominion's official delegation departed the station, delivering a final, formal message from Vantessa herself, an invitation for continued correspondence, respectful and entirely without pressure, exactly the kind of gesture that suggested a genuine friendship might grow from an encounter that had started as nothing more than a princess's careless amusement. I kept working on cargo lifts after that, mostly. The station's residents treated me with slightly more curiosity than before, occasional whispered glances following me through crowded corridors, but the novelty faded within a few weeks, exactly as these things usually do. Life on Meridian Concord Station returned to its familiar rhythm of arrivals and departures, cargo manifests and maintenance schedules, the same quiet routine I had built for myself over 6 careful years. Vantessa did write, eventually, brief and thoughtful messages that arrived every few weeks, questions about ordinary things rather than war stories, curious about the life I had chosen rather than the legend I had left behind. I answered honestly, each time, grateful for a correspondence that asked nothing of the name Ashwalker and everything of the person actually living behind it. Sometimes, late in a work shift, standing alone beside a half-repaired cargo lift with grease on my hands and the station's familiar hum surrounding me, I would think back to that first moment on the promenade, the trembling floor, the confident voice cutting through the crowd, the challenge offered so casually, for fun, by someone who had no idea what she was truly inviting into the light. I never regretted accepting it. Not the match itself, not the truth it uncovered, not the strange, unexpected friendship that grew from its aftermath. If a bored princess's careless challenge was the price of finally letting a small part of an old legend breathe again, quietly, carefully, on my own terms, then it was a price I found myself, somewhat to my own surprise, genuinely glad to have paid. Somewhere out among the stars, I imagine there are still records being written, still stories being retold, still warnings whispered to young royals about a name that once turned the tide of an entire war. Let them keep telling those stories. I know now that legends can rest quietly behind ordinary lives, waiting patiently, needing nothing more than an occasional afternoon of unexpected courage to remind the universe they never truly disappeared at all.